Okay, let's start. So if it's fine for you, I just introduce the people. So today is the tutorial session. We have 2 tutorials, as you saw. There will be 2 short tutorials and a long one and the other one. But you chose right. So the first tutorial will be given by Niklas Miedinger. He's working at JKU, but also at the local startup, NXI. And basically, he's doing nothing less than trying to get a new model out, the xLSTM, which maybe has the potential to become a new transformer. I don't know. We will see. Yeah, so as a student, he wrote, it's not online anymore, but he wrote a blog post about the LSTM where he explained all the tricks that he learned. And that's when he first came over your name. Then he worked a lot on biological applications. And yeah, just all cutting edge AI stuff. So looking forward to see what you teach us.
Sure. Thanks for the introduction. So welcome everyone. So today I will be giving a tutorial on the xLSTM. So I call this tutorial Modern Recurrent Models at the Efficiency Frontier. It already says we want to have recurrent models, and we also be efficient and see like if we can improve on the problems that like established methods like transformers have. So the tutorial outline for today will be, first we are going to give like a broad background. So I was not entirely sure like what the audience like what's the knowledge, but I think you will all be familiar with transformers, I guess. But nevertheless, we are going to talk about softmax attention and transformers. Then we are going all the way back in time, look at old recurrent neural networks, and finally at the LSTM. Then we're also quickly discussing subquadratic attention or linear attention, because this is like important, like, and the xLSTM builds on top of research in that direction. And then we are going to like make this connection between RNNs, linear attention, all the way to the modern like xLSTM and also other related works in that space. Finally, we are going to talk also about like xLSTM scalability. So what have been the efforts for scaling this thing up, and how do scaling laws and things like this compare to transformers. And finally, we are going to talk about all the published xLSTM applications that we have seen in the last months. So there we talk about vision, robotics, biology, and also time series. And finally, which is not on this slide, I will give a bit of an outlook and like what we're currently researching. So first, let's start with the background about softmax attention and transformers. I think most of you are going to be very familiar with the transformer. So basically, it's a deep learning architecture from like this very like famous paper now, Attention is All You Need. And basically it came up with the self-attention mechanism, or like took it from like earlier versions, but made like the full model use this self-attention, not rely on any RNNs or CNNs or whatever. And the cool thing about the transformer is that it's like parallelizable during training. This is not something that the sequence architectures before had. They were always recurrent, where you had to like train step by step. Like this makes it slow, especially on like current hardware like GPUs. So the transformer really introduced this concept that you can parallelize across the sequence dimension and get like very good GPU utilization because of that. And it also led to this kind of like grand unification in like machine learning across domains. So if you looked at like what came before 2017, you had a lot of like, you had like some RNNs in audio, on text you had other things, like on images everyone was using CNNs, but the transformer then like went over all those domains and basically became in a lot of these domains like the main architecture. So if you look at like audio today or images today, you see a lot of the top models are transformers based with like vision transformers or other like audio models. And so it became like more about the data, and the architecture became kind of fixed. And also the transformer has like a very deep connection to associative networks. So there's this paper from the JKU, which is called Hopfield Networks is All You Need, which kind of draws the connection between these old, like theoretically based associative memories and the transformer attention mechanism. Yeah, basically quickly like how the self-attention operator works. So first, it's designed to capture these long-range dependencies in like a parallelizable way. It can also attend to different positions in parallel. And basically it works like this, that you have like some input sequence, like shown down here, and you project this to like three different representations, like queries, keys, and values. So you have basically the queries that tell you what are you searching for. Then basically you compute for each query a dot product with the set of keys. And this gives you then kind of like a score with this dot product. What you do is you normalize this with like a softmax, which gives it like kind of like this nice that it sums to 1 property. And then you use these attention weights basically on the values that correspond to the keys to aggregate them together, and then you get like an output for the given query. And you can do this for all the queries basically in parallel. So sequence goes in, every query attends basically to all the keys, aggregates all the values from the past, and produces an output sequence of the same dimension. So you have like a sequence to sequence model. Basically here on the right, you have this like famous kind of like formula. You have the queries times the keys. You do a softmax over the rows, because this thing here spans like a squared attention matrix that has the same shape as the time dimension, so time by time. And you multiply this by the values, and then you get like the output H here. For decoding, so during training, everything is nice and parallel. But for decoding, like when you do like new generation of words, transformers are a bit more clumsy, because what you need to do is basically you produce a word, then you feed that word in, and then you get the next word, right? And you do this all the time, and you have to basically process the whole sequence in parallel again and again. So Fox is here computed before, but here it's computed again, and here it's recomputed again. So you have to do all these recomputations. So this is very inefficient. So what people do to make this decoding fast, they use like this concept of key value caching. So because you have already computed like the keys, right, you can just basically cache them. You just keep them around. So you produce like keys and values. You just cache them, and then you just then you can, for the current query, just attend to these cached keys, right? So this is like every transformer uses this in an autoregressive way for generation. The problem here then becomes memory. So because you have to cache basically, if you do like a forward at the inference time, you have to cache like a batch size and the whole sequence length. For each, you have to cache like two keys and values, and you have like the whole layers, and then you also have the dimension of the keys and values. So this key value cache, if you generate long sequences, or you basically encode long sequences, this key value cache becomes kind of like a bottleneck. It becomes very large, and there's a pretty fast crossover point, especially in the large batch or the large sequence length setting, where like you even have more memory than the weights of the whole transformer. And now you think of like I don't know, like a multiple billion parameter model. Like this becomes some pretty blocking. Yeah, and another cool thing that attention introduces is like the concept of multi-heads. So you don't do just attention like for like one input over like these keys, but what you do is like you split it into multiple heads and run multiple attention operators in parallel. This allows the model basically to aggregate different kinds of information from the past. Then there's also this concept of group query attention, and this is really like designed to reduce the size of the key value cache. Basically, you now have like less keys and values, and queries attend to kind of the same set of keys. Then you don't have to cache as many as at inference time, and this was really designed to make the cache smaller. Basically, quick summary. So you have the quadratic time complexity because of the like how it's parallelized, and this becomes problematic for long sequence lengths. You have parallel training, so this is very cool because you get GPU utilization, and you have very memory intensive decoding or generation, right? Because so the linear memory complexity inference time is linear, so because you are the time complexity because you enter the memory as well, and because you scan through the sequence to produce a new output in a linear way, but you get very high memory burden because of this large key value cache. Now we've seen some properties of the transformer. Now maybe let's go back in time and see basically recurrent neural networks and long short-term memories and what the properties of those were before we had the transformer. So probably you have maybe also worked with these. So basically an RNN maps the input of one time step and the last hidden state of another time step, it combines it and produces then an output. Basically, you have a mapping of like a time step here, and you combine it together with the representation at the previous time step, and then there's usually some kind of activation here, and then you do like kind of memory readout where you process the time step. Then you just pass on the next time step and you process the next input. And basically you ticker over the sequence and then until the whole thing is processed, right? So what the property here is, you have here usually like a vector valued state, right? So the entire basically sequence gets compressed into this like vector sized memory, and this also leads a bit to kind of like that the state is basically just too small to capture the entire information that's in the sequence, right? And also this like how this like one step depends on the other one is like in like a nonlinear way, because usually you wrap like some activation nonlinear activation function around the combination, and this then basically destroys that you cannot parallelize it during training, right? You have to during training as well process the whole sequence in this like step-by-step manner, which is not very good on like modern GPUs. And also like one way to think about this thing is if you unroll basically this loop network, you can think of this as just like a deep neural network, right? And the property here is you have shared values, shared weights at each layer. And so you can think of this as just a deep MLP with like inputs from at each layer, but all the weights of the layers are the same because it always applies in a loop the same transformation. Yeah, so these RNNs had this problem of the vanishing gradients. This is what Sepp Hochreiter like developed in his like diploma thesis, and for that to mitigate this vanishing gradient issue, basically the vanishing gradient issue is that like basically the time steps very far in the past. They don't really get a gradient signal anymore, so the model cannot really learn these long-term dependencies in like just one sentence. And Sepp kind of like he mitigated this by introducing this long short-term memory. And basically what this works, like the main component is like a persistent cell state. So you can see the cell state that flows basically through the cell. Like this is from the previous time step to the next one. And to make this more expressive, you really have these learned gates. You have like forget gates and input gates. And basically the cell state has like a near identity path. So it gets passed to the next one just with like an addition. So you have this like, they call it constant error carousel. And this preserves the gradients over hundreds of steps. And this mitigated this gradient, the vanishing gradient problem. And these nonlinear gates, so basically like some info flow, I will show the formula in a second, but some info flows in, it gets filtered, then the memory gets filtered, and you add them together again. This gives the model really the ability to model like complex nonlinear dynamics. Basically just like how you do it like formulaically. So you have like some input set. This is like just one input for a time step. And first you multiply this by a learned gate that decides, okay, how much information from this time step should basically flow into the cell, right? And the gate here is constructed basically just as like a sigmoid gated activation. And you can see that it also depends on the previous step, right? And so this is, you filter the inputs, and then you have this like this old state. So this is like the old memory of the model, like what it has remembered from the past. And then you filter this using the forget gate in like the really identical mechanism. So first you filter what comes in, and basically then you filter what should be erased from the memory, and then you just add them together to give like your new memory, so to say, from one time step to another. So this is like a recurrent formulation, right? And finally, we have like some output gate that also filters, okay, what should flow out of the cell. And basically this is what's shown here in this LSTM cell diagram. So the important thing is really, if you think of it as like a memory, like a constant size memory that gets passed over time and gets then filtered with these like expressive gates. I think I might have disconnected. No, it worked. Yeah, back again. So yeah, LSTMs have really kind of stood the test of time. Like, for example, they have been used in like game settings, reinforcement learning problems. There was this like this DOTA playing game like from OpenAI. There it used the LSTMs, or in the DeepMind games, they also had the LSTMs, I think in StarCraft. Then basically it was also used in the first language models. So if you look at the first papers that really tried this pre-training in the NLP setting, where we don't just, where we really train on large corpus of text first and then use it for downstream applications, think like BERT and all that stuff. And here it was used in, for example, in Elmo. So BERT was the first one that used transformers, and Elmo still used this bidirectional kind of like LSTM RNN things. Also in hydrology, there it had a lot of successes. No. Basically, quick summary. So we have a linear time complexity, but unfortunately not parallelizable during training or pre-filling. So pre-filling is if you have like a long PDF or something and you want to encode it before you start generating. Then it has expressive nonlinear gates, like forget gates and input gates. It also mitigates this vanishing gradient problem. And it has a fixed size vector valued memory state. So each basically memory that flows in here is like think of it as a vector. And it had extensive applications, early language models, RL, and also time series and stuff like this. Then let's talk a bit about subquadratic attention. So there, some people are now thinking about like how do we make basically attention like subquadratic so that it does not have this quadratic problem, right? And one main thing is like it's called linear attention. And actually the concept is pretty simple. So linear attention is simply attention without the softmax. And we will see then later in a second why this then like solves this quadratic problem. Basically, you have this quadratic softmax attention here. And basically, you have this like QK again. Here we multiply it with a causal mask. So you have to multiply this with the causal mask, the attention matrix, so that it basically cannot cheat and that you can train it in an autoregressive way. And basically, one output is calculated like this. So you have like a given query that attends to all the keys until T. And basically this normalized dot product, because it's normalized with the softmax, gets multiplied by the value. And then you like multiply this for all the values in the past up to the query T. And then you get the output at position T. Linear attention basically just throws the softmax away, also the normalizer and the exponential. So this is the softmax here. And basically then you just have like this QK dot products multiplied by the V summed up until position T here. And so the question is, why is this thing subquadratic? Because here, like this is still a quadratic implementation. You still have here like a attention matrix that is T by T, right? And the thing is like you can, if you don't have a softmax in between these things, like you have Q and K and V, basically you can change the order of operations and just by using associativity. And then basically it gives you like this outer product of like values at position J. And this outer product is a small D by D matrix. So V has a dimension D, K has a dimension D. If you do an outer product, you get like a little D by D matrix, right? And then you sum this up, like this is like a cumulative sum. You multiply it by the queries, and this is the same thing as you would do it in this order. And basically, the cool trick here is that linear attention is basically then an RNN because you have two mathematically equivalent formulations, right? So on one hand side, basically what this linear attention implements is a linear recurrence with matrix valued hidden states. So they are now not vector valued anymore, but they are like little matrices. So this is the parallel implementation that we've seen before. So you have the queries, you multiply it by the keys, you get this like attention matrix, you apply the causal mask, this is this thing here, and then you multiply it by the values and you get the outputs. So this is like how you compute it in parallel. And actually this is mathematically, it gives you the exact same outputs if you compute it as this recurrence, because you use this associative property. And what you do is at each position, so this one of these two pairs here is one time step, you basically compute the outer product of K and V, right? And then you just do like a cumulative sum over these matrices. And you can think of these matrices as like the memory state that we've seen in like an RNN, right? And then at each position, you multiply the query at that position with this little matrix, with this little memory matrix, and you get the readout vector that is like thing. So you also map like a sequence to a sequence. And here you have really like an RNN but basically you construct the memory cells with these outer products. And then it's exactly the same as like doing attention without softmax. So the cool thing is you now can formulate the linear attention with three forms: the parallel form. So here you have quadratic time complexity, and it's still problematic for long sequences. Then you have the recurrent form, where you have like this, basically S here are these outer product matrices, and you always accumulate these outer product V's values and keys. And then at each position, you do a readout by multiplying this state S with the query key. This gives you like one vector output. And the recurrent form has now the same problems that RNNs had. So it has like poor GPU utilization. It is not parallelizable across the sequence dimension. And these rank one outer product updates and the vector, because we have here rank one, basically outer product, and we have vector matrix multiplication, this thing here. They are not optimized for GPU tensor cores, which usually like matrix matrix multiplication with like 16 by 16 size. And so we have the recurrent form and the parallel form, which are two extremes. And what people have done and what you can do, you can reformulate this as a chunkwise parallel form. And this is basically an interpolation between the parallel and the recurrent mode, right? So you split the sequence into chunks, and within a chunk, you apply the parallel mode, and across chunk, you accumulate the contributions using the recurrent form. And this is basically how this looks like. So intra-chunk, you use the parallel form, and across chunks, you use the recurrent, basically, form. And this is, and if you use the chunk size in a specific size, usually like 64 tokens or 128 tokens, then it's like subquadratic. It's reasonably fast, has good GPU utilization, and is more efficient than attention because the chunk size is small. Then it's still subquadratic, right? So you get the subquadratic complexity mode basically, and this is really the default mode how these linear models are trained. Like xLSTM is trained like this, Mamba is trained like this. Gated linear attention is trained like this. This is like the main mode for training. Basically the summary here again. So the linear attention basically removes softmax from the attention computation. This then gives us a recurrent formulation with matrix valued hidden state. So this is new. We have a lot more memory capacity because we don't store in vectors, but we store in like little matrices. This can be then represented with three modes: parallel mode, recurrent mode, and chunkwise parallel mode. And the chunkwise parallel allows to train in subquadratic time in a hardware-friendly manner. And this allows then for efficient pre-filling at inference time. And then at generation time, you switch this to RNN mode and you generate like one word after one another. So you can like switch between these modes, which is like gives us a lot of flexibility. Then we have like from RNNs and linear attention to xLSTM. Okay, now we have seen transformers, RNNs, linear attention. So how do we get to xLSTM? So the main motivation of the original xLSTM paper was to look at like some of the LSTM limitations. First, not parallelizable, or that it has storage limitations. Remember, we store everything in like a small vector with the LSTMs. And that it struggles with revision of storage decisions. So you had these like input gates, but the input gates, they were usually kept at like with like a sigmoid value. And what the revision of storage decisions means, it really had hard time to remember, like if a new information comes in that is more important than something that was stored as important before, like it had no mechanism to like push that decision up and say, okay, this is now even more important. And this is like one of the things where the LSTM struggled, which we see in this like these little synthetic tasks here. And also it had only like a single information stream. So an LSTM like was never operating in like a multi-head mode kind of. You always had like one cell that basically processed the whole sequence, but transformers basically in one layer, they look at like the sequence in multiple different angles, right? And this was then also like the LSTM doesn't have this. And these are like some synthetic tasks to test this. So the simple nearest neighbor search is like you give the network the network a vector in the beginning, and then it should scan like a sequence. It should scan basically through the sequence and say whenever it finds like a better matching pair, like the nearest neighbor for the query vector, so to say. Transformers have pretty easy time, so you get like very small MSE if you do this. But the LSTM, which could not say, okay, this is now more important than the thing I've already stored, like this gets like a high loss, right? Another thing is because you have storage limitations, like small vectors, they were always pretty bad at like rare words and stuff like this, that they did not think it's that important. A transformer can just look back if it needs it. So if you look at the perplexity, so perplexity here means like smaller is better. For rare words, so these are like buckets of like the rarity kinda. On the rare words, basically the LSTM had like a much higher perplexity than like a transformer, right? So this is like one of the problems if you have like a fixed limited memory, and this is like a synthetic test, how you can test for that. And basically what the xLSTM paper did, it introduced like the sLSTM and the mLSTM layers, right? So it's like two novel mixing layers. And so first the sLSTM should overcome like some shortcomings of the original LSTM, and it also should offer like kind of like state tracking capabilities, like keeping track of state, which like the old LSTM was not that great at. And the mLSTM, on the other hand, was designed to be like an expressive linear attention variant that tackles really like transformer inefficiencies in both training and inference time by taking ideas from like this linear attention literature. And it's also not either or, so both modules can be combined like however you want. So for example, in the original LSTM language modeling paper, they used like 7 layers of mLSTM, and then 1 layer of mLSTM, and then 7 layers of M again, and then 1 S is sprinkled in between. And in the application section, we will see that it really depends a bit on your use case, like what could be better. So let's take a quick look at the sLSTM mixer. So basically the formula here you like kind of recognize from the LSTM, you have like some input gate. This is like the previous input, and you have some like forget gate that filters the previous input, right? But now there's a few new things. So you have like exponential input gating, right? So this exponential, instead of like sigmoid, should really have this property that if something more important comes in, like you can like make it even higher, push it up, right? You can make this like kind of like more important. Also, it introduced like multi-head memory. So this cell is now run in parallel like a multi-head transformer. So this memory mixing happens only within these separate heads. So you get like different information of the sequence. So also this multi-head was taken from transformers. It also introduces a new normalizer state, because like if you just put like an exponential in there, it's not going to be nice with numerics. So the normalizer state and also other tricks, which I don't show on this slide, help for stabilizing like this exponential gate a lot. And the sLSTM is like it really still depends on the hidden state in a non-linear way. So the sLSTM is not parallelizable. So this is very good for like time series and stuff like this, where the old LSTM actually was still like still very dominant now. But it really gives you more like ability to track state, and like improves the performance in like over the old LSTM in like these kind of domains. The mLSTM is more like a linear attention variant. So you can see here, the C here is now not a vector anymore, but the memory is now also like a matrix, like these little D by D matrices. It also has taken the exponential input gate concept, but now we have like this matrix memory. So this gives us a lot of more storage capacity, so to say. And as I said, this inherits the computational properties from linear attention. So we also have 3 modes for the mLSTM, like parallel, recurrent, and chunkwise parallel. And the gates here, they don't depend on like the previous time step. So they only depend on the current token. So this means the whole thing is like trainable parallel like a transformer, but can be used like an RNN at inference time. Yeah, here's the comparison with the linear attention. Basically, linear attention just does a cumulative sum. So if you think of like how the information is transported across time, it basically just sums one matrix on top of the other matrix, right? And this then leads to kind of like pattern interference, because the model has no real concept of forgetting information or controlling like this memory. It's basically just like it just sums up all the memories from the past into the current basically memory, and this then leads to problems. But now taking ideas from like the old LSTM, if you give the model control to filter this memory, so you have like ways to kind of like remove information from these matrices and also make kind of like storage decisions and write into these matrices via like forget and input gate, then this gives it like, of course, a much more basically stronger, more expressive behavior, right? Then maybe just a quick note on how like you implement this in parallel, like with the gates. So basically you have like some input, and then you have basically like little projections in the network that produce you like forget gate values, and you have like one forget gate value for each head, so to say. And for example, if you look at the network, like this kind of like this squared matrix, then looks something like this. So basically you can think of this as like a learned decay. So the model learns like how long it should keep information, and some heads keep information very long, but in a more average sense. But some heads really just remember like basically the current last few positions and stuff like this. And each head can learn this independently. And basically you construct these with like basically a cumulative product, and then you stack it together in this matrix, and it really like looks like this, like a forget matrix. And you combine it with the input gates, and then you get like basically like a gate matrix that looks like this. And this is here called D. So D has all the input gate and forget gate contributions that come from these additional gates. And then what you do is like in linear attention, you just compute this thing, like linear attention would just do this. But what the xLSTM does, you multiply this squared matrix, like the attention matrix without softmax, you multiply it with like this D gate matrix. So you have in this attention matrix, the model learns, okay, like what things to gate, what things to forget and stuff like this. Basically here's then like some stabilization tricks because of the exponential and so on. And then you just multiply it again, like this C, like this the attention matrix by V, similar as linear attention. So basically gating plus some normalization, and then you have like a linear attention turned into xLSTM. And okay, let's see how this performs, at least on our synthetics. So first, the problem was it's not parallelizable. Well, now it can be trained in parallel and be used recurrently at inference time. It had storage limitations. Yeah, the xLSTM now has a matrix valued state. It's still like fixed memory, but it's much larger than like a simple vector storage. Then we have the revision of storage decision. So now both of these things use the exponential input gate, and this helps it to weigh up information that is now more important than whatever has come in the past. Before it had just a single information stream in the xLSTM. Now we have multi-head in both, basically both layers, right? So both layers look at the past in like different ways. And you can see this like matches more closely what the transformer has, which has really like perfect look back. So basically in the, what's it called, nearest neighbor problem, like the transformer has a very easy job. It just like scans back and finds the correct one. But here the xLSTM, which is still compressive, but performs much better than the old LSTM. And also in the perplexity, you can see the perplexity on rare words on Wikipedia data is like even a bit better than transformer. Another very cool thing about the xLSTM is the length generalization. So because we basically have these learned gates, you don't need to train these models with positional embeddings. So transformers always use positional embeddings because how the attention mechanism is designed. But the xLSTM and xLSTM, because of their recurrent nature and because of the gating, they don't need explicit position embeddings, and they're usually not trained like this. So transformer usually uses like rotary embeddings, and the xLSTM does not need this. And as you might know, these rotary embeddings often make problems in the sense that if you train on like a given context length, and then at test time you use a longer context length, like these things don't work, and there's even like whole research about it, how to mitigate this problem. And because you don't need it in the LSTM, you can see that the length generalization, so you train short, but then you test long, then this becomes much better. So for example, here in this experiment, this is like a 1.3 billion xLSTM. It was trained on a context of up to 2048. So this is like the training context window. But now you test basically on documents, basically the perplexity on documents that are longer than what you've seen during training. And you can see perplexity, again, lower is better. Like you can see the perplexity kind of stays almost constant for the xLSTM, but for the transformer, because it like has these issues with the rotary performances, like this then becomes much worse. So this length generalization is like a cool thing, and it's directly baked into the architecture. Maybe one note also about the block structure, because like usually you have like some sequence mixing layer, like these two, but they are integrated into like larger structures within the network. For example, in a transformer, you have usually like self-attention, and then you have like an MLP. here, like a multi-layer perceptron that has like this special up projection, gating, and down projection thing, which is called like gated linear units. And basically the xLSTM directly uses this glue or gated linear unit MLP on top. But the initial MLSTM used this kind of like pre-up projection architecture, which was derived from Mamba. So probably maybe you know Mamba or have heard of it. It's like a state space model. This is pretty similar. And this uses this like pre-up projection thing. The advantage of this, for example, is that you here get like a larger dimension in this matrix, so you have a bit more storage capacity. But now, like as this was scaled up, the architecture was redesigned a bit. So in a modern MLSTM, you usually also use this post-up projection MLPs. And basically, this is how the layer internally looks like compared to a transformer. So in a transformer, you have query projections, key projections, and value projections. In the MLSTM, you have exact same, but you also have projections for input gates, for get gates, and then you have like an output gate that projects here and filters the output. You have an additional norm that norms within a head. And this is like, you can see there's a lot of duality or like a lot of similarity between these two layers. And this is also like important for like current research. Okay, so then a question is, okay, how do you optimize these things that they are actually fast? How do you train them? Because for attention, everyone uses like flash attention nowadays, which is like a tiled implementation that makes the training very efficient. It makes it sub-quadratic in memory during training, but the attention, what you cannot mitigate is the quadratic complexity in time. But the flash attention mitigates that. That's why since flash attention came out, like the context length of language models have gone up quite a bit. And with linear attention, you also have kind of like efficient kernels that implement this chunkwise parallel mode. And there was a paper published from our institute, like this tiled flash linear attention, that really is like a novel kernel algorithm that combines ideas from flash attention. So basically you apply flash attention within the chunks, and then you have some recurrent kernels across those chunks. So if you're interested in like kernel development, this is like very interesting to look into, and the kernels are also on GitHub. Also for the xLSTM, where we do this, like where we have like a real recurrence, there was a paper from the institute that made this flash RNN, like how to optimize these RNN kernels as well. And maybe just like a very quick note on like recent work. So in like a lot of like gated linear attention variants have come out recently. Like you have Mamba, you have gated linear attention, you have this RWKV or RAKUV, how they call it. And basically you can see like these are all different methods that have been proposed in like recent months. And you can always see it always has like this structure, the recurrent structure. You have like some matrix state, you have an outer product of values and keys. So this is really like linear attention here. And then they really just differ in like the way you use gating, and like they propose different gating mechanisms. And so basically, and then you have usually like a memory readout where you multiply this matrix by the query, and they also differ. So the main differences in these architectures is usually like a gating formulation, like what gates do they use, like how do they normalize, or how do they normalize, and then also like how the hidden state is read out. This is this thing over here. So MLSTM is unique here. It has an input gate. So most of these don't have input gates. They just have kind of like learned for get gates. And DeltaNet and gated DeltaNet, they are an exception here. And they're also comparatively strong layers. There's also this cool GitHub repository. It's called like Flash Linear Attention. I don't know if the slides will be shared, but I have everything linked here. There, like a PhD student, she implements all these like cool new architectures with like Triton kernels. So it's like kind of like a fast implementation, and you can all try them. It's pretty cool. And maybe let's get to scalability. So in scalability, the question always is, okay, how do these networks scale? Because a lot of things work at small scales, but as you go large enough, like the things start to fall apart. And a lot of things have been proposed that did not scale up afterwards. So you have to kind of like validate this. And in the xLSTM space, there have been like kind of like two important works. The first one was the initial scale up, or like a first scale up to 7 billion parameters. So you have like this recurrent LLM, and it's basically based on and it's based on like xLSTM. So this is fully based xLSTM. This is important for the parallelizability, right? And it also has some changes in the normalization and the gating. So this is basically this architecture that I have shown here. This is like what is used in the 7 billion because it's faster and because it's parallelizable, it's more efficient. Yeah, basically it was trained on this cluster here, and it was trained on 2.3 trillion tokens, which is not a lot. So usually you have like the llamas had like 15 trillion tokens, the new Quen models have like, I don't know, 36 trillion tokens. So you can see this is really at the low end in terms of like how much data you put in. But pre-training is very expensive, so this is something that's hard to do. But given that it's not trained on that much tokens, it performs like pretty well. It performs like comparably to like other like efficient architectures like Falcon Mamba or the xLSTM. So you can see it's even like better than Falcon Mamba, but at like less training tokens. So you can see it's also more data efficient in that setting. Like then you have like more like Samba. Samba is like a hybrid architecture. You still have attention, but you also have these like I think Mamba layers. Yeah. And you can see it even outperforms the original Llama 2 7 billion, which is quite cool. But newer iterations of Llama, they're already better. So you can see a difference in this like MMLU Pro. So this is about like world knowledge. Like it asks like questions like this, and it's like a QA benchmark, and this just measures how good the model there is. But these were just basically like empirical results. Okay, how well does it do against like standard architectures? But it's not like a really like a large scale scaling loss analysis, right? So scaling loss are basically these like analyses. Okay, how do things scale? Like a lot of it started with like it was the Chinchilla paper by DeepMind, and basically a lot of techniques come from there. And basically you look at you compare models by like how much training flops they use. Okay, how much floating point operations does like your training use? So the more flops, the more expensive it is, right? And then you just look at that, like how does the loss scale when you like scale up the model and the data and so on. And these are like preliminary results, but like at some point like a paper will be released. And basically what we can see here, you can see that the xLSTM kind of forms like a new Pareto front, as they call it. This means that for no matter how how large or small your training budget is, like when you train an xLSTM, you get like a better loss than you get with like a transformer that uses the same amount of flops, right? So you can reach any loss with roughly 1.5 fewer flops than a transformer on this like context lengths that were studied here. Okay, this is like a caveat because on very long context length, the transformer still has also some advantages with recall and so on. Yeah, and one thing that's also interesting that is not really shown in like these plots is like even if your xLSTM is a bit larger or a bit more expensive during training, it's still a lot cheaper at inference time than the transformer, because the transformer has this like very expensive key value cache, but the xLSTM has these much smaller kind of like matrix states. So the memory like shrinks by 90% or something like this. And this makes it like, even if you train a larger model, like it still can be cheaper at inference time. No. So these are just early results, and I hope like we can say more in a bit. Next, I would go to the xLSTM applications. So now we have like a bit of an overview of how the xLSTM works, how it's connected to like other things. And now over the last month, we have worked on a lot of applications, and I will just show them here. Let's first start with like vision. So we had the vision LSTM, and basically the idea is, okay, now we had transformers in vision. You have like the VIT or the vision transformer. Can we just do like a vision LSTM? And basically it works in the same exact way. So you have like some input image, and you split this into basically non-overlapping patches. Like you flatten them out into a sequence. So you make like basically the vision model like just a sequence model. And then you just have like some linear projection, some positional encoding here. So positional encodings here, they would not be necessary for real, but they can help. Like if you add kind of the information and you don't care about the length generalization, then adding explicit position information can be helpful. And then you have like an encoder, like this is like here in xLSTM, you put it through, and then in the end, you just take the last token and the first token and the last token, and you have some projection head and you train this in like a supervised way. So here we did not do any like self-supervised training. So this was all trained in a supervised way, like think ImageNet, image classification, stuff like that. And the thing with images is like they don't have like an inherent direction, right? Like it's 2D. So you need to think of a way, how do you make the LSTM, which has kind of like an inherent direction, how do you use it in like, how do you make it bidirectional? And in the bio applications, which we'll see later, this was also like one of the main things that we tried. And here they have like a very simple way. So basically what you can do is you just have alternating blocks. So one block goes in this direction, another block goes in the other direction. So you just alternate between layers, because then like the first layer basically processes the image like over one, like in one direction, and the next layer processes in the other direction. And then over layers, you get like this like bidirectional behavior. And this is nice because it's like same price as you would pay for like another attention layer. You don't have to run things twice, but maybe at cost. Yeah, and then pre-trained it was on like ImageNet, so you train it on these like 1.3 million images. And here the models were still quite small, like you had 6 million, 23 million, 89 million. And this was because this was the first application and there are no efficient kernels, like no efficient implementations for the xLSTM existed yet. And to go over the results. So first, like just testing it on classification. So how good is it at classifying images? Then also on segmentation. And then what you do is you take the model and you fine tune it on domains where you don't have a lot of data, like think medical images and stuff like this. This is like an adaptation benchmark. And you can see it's like pretty strong on the classification compared to like DIT is like a transformer based, and Vim is like a vision mamba. So it's quite good on the classification, but it's especially good on like segmentation. So you can see here the curve or this IOU is larger. And also if you then adapt it at inference time, so you take a pre-trained model and you fine tune it on like some like downstream tasks, like also there, like it performs well over transformers and over mambas. So strong results on image classification, segmentation, and also downstream adaptation. Another thing was like, how could we use it in like robotic control and in reinforcement learning? Because this was also like one of the domains where classic LSTMs kind of stayed like quite strong. So there was this paper, which was recently published, I think at ICML, and it's called a large recurrent action model, or LRAM. And basically what this is, it's like a generalist agent with xLSTM at its core. So if you know like Gato or something from DeepMind, it's like very similar in spirit. And basically this works with this decision transformer approach. Sometimes it's also called like policy distillation. So what you do is you have a lot of domains, like for example, like robotic control or like Atari games, or these are like these, like I think Muchoku, physics simulators, also like robot arms, stuff like this. What you do is you train like little specialized policies with RL or little specialized agents with RL on each of these domains, right? And then you get like very good specialized agents. And what you do then, you generate rollouts using these agents. So you use them to generate data. So you have like trajectories. And once you have those trajectories, you can do just supervised learning on them. So you just turn the whole RL thing into like a sequence learning problem. Basically, you train a language model on the outputs of these agents or the trajectories of these agents. And the thing is, you don't do this per domain, but you mix up all the domains and compress all of this in the model. And in the end, you get like a language model that can control robots or play games or whatever. Yeah, and in this paper, there was a comparison of like these modern recurrent architectures. So one thing they here looked at is how much does the xLSTM help? So if you really have like recurrence and state tracking built in. So they tested this xLSTM 7.1. 7 here means 7 mLSTM layer and 1 SLSTM layer. And then you just repeat this with the same ratio. And the other one is just an xLSTM. So this is parallelizable, fast, like the 7B model. And they compared against Mamba and against transformers. Yeah, there were multiple backbones. So you have 4 different sizes so that they could show a bit of like a scaling behavior from 16 million up to 200 million parameters. And trained, you can see like how many tokens, like 890 million tokens. And they all came from these domains here. And all the trajectories were also then publicly released. So if you're into training like these agents, then you can also use them. Yeah, and because it's like a sequence problem, you can really use like sequence metrics to analyze this. So how kind of perplexed is a model, or what's the perplexity on like a trajectory and so on. And this then kind of shows, okay, how good is the model at modeling these sequences. And what we can see is the xLSTM with the sLSTM built in. So this is the blue one. Basically achieves the lowest perplexity, basically scaled over the number of parameters. So this is like a mini scaling loss where you scale up the number of parameters, and then you can see the xLSTM is here also at this like kind of Pareto frontier where you always get the best loss using this architecture. The mLSTM is second one and is on the same level as a Mamba. So you can see Mamba is like in a similar class. But again, does not have this recurrent state tracking, nice and parallelizable, but loses a bit of performance. And then you also have these environment interactions, like you can see the performance here. So here you can also see that the normalized score, like if the model performs really in the environment, so this is just sequence, you look at sequence losses. Here you really let the model perform, how well does it perform in an environment, and you get like a normalized score. You can also see the same thing holds here. The mLSTM works well, and the sLSTM is also quite strong if you then execute these agents in the environments. Yeah, and if you look at the eval performance per domain, this is again this normalized environment score. So there's no basically like real gain in some domains. So it's not that robotics is very good and the other one like games is very bad. But it's like what you observe, it's like the blue and the green one, they're consistently like very strong models, like on the same level as transformers on basically all of the tasks. Also here, there was this like in context learning benchmark, and we can also see here the state tracking with the sLSTM. The blue one works very well. And here you can see, okay, it's quite on the same level as a transformer, but okay, what do I gain? And what you gain basically is, yeah, also it gets better with sequence length, sorry. But what you gain is really like the performance at inference time. When you later execute this agent, you can really use like an RNN mode where you just do step-by-step decoding. Transformer has to cache all its history. So basically you can see here, this is like latency for the green LSTM, it kind of stays constant. If the context length or the time steps that you kind of like interact increases, so it kind of like stays almost constant. But for the transformer, you can see the latency goes up, it gets slower, and at some point it just out of memories because of the large cache. Yeah, same for this is the GPU RAM. Like with the LSTM, you have a fixed size state, so you always have like the same number of memories, and it's independent of the context length. But for a transformer, yeah, this is not very efficient. So you get more efficient inference time, and for like comparable performance, I would say. Next, we also tried it at like biology tasks. So language modeling biologies, they're becoming much more prominent. So a lot of people are training protein language models, DNA language models, stuff like this. And so we trained the bio-xLSTM. And basically bio-xLSTM, here we did not train like one architecture, but actually we trained 3. So we train like a DNA xLSTM. So this is trained on the human reference genome. Then there's prot xLSTM, which had like a I will talk more about this one because I don't have time to talk about all 3. This has like a kind of like a retrieval augmentation built in. So we call this like homology aware modeling. I will talk about this one in a second. And then we have the xLSTM, which works on small molecules and also shows some in-context learning behavior. And one thing that's important for biology, again, like with images, biology does not have like an inherent direction. So how do you process like a DNA sequence? It does not have like this causality that you have like with natural language. So we had to explore like different bidirectional methods for the MLSTM or for the xLSTM as well, just for the xLSTM. And one like actually old thing to do is like weight sharing. So this was, for example, like used in Elmo. Like Elmo is like, again, this like old language model before BERT that kicked off like language model pre-training. And basically what you do is you have like these two blocks, like this is one xLSTM block. And what you do is you just share them. And what you do is like with one block, you process in one direction, and then you take the sequence, flip the sequence, put it through the same block again, and flip it back and then just add it together. So this is like a weight sharing approach where you like process the sequence in both directions and then combine the results. This is one option that we've tried, and this works very well. Another thing is that we've seen in the vision xLSTM before, where you just have alternating directions. So like first layer goes in that direction, second layer goes in that direction, and then just like this. Then we also kind of like invented or like introduced like a native bidirectionality. So here you basically do the whole block, but actually you can build in the bidirectionality directly at this layer. And there have also been like multiple papers on Mamba come out that do something similar. I think it's called Hydra. But you can also, this means that you can just build this native bidirectionality. You can build it into the sequence mixer itself. And basically, okay, so how does this prot xLSTM work? So here we have like this kind of like retrieval augmented thing, because with proteins you don't really have inherently these like long sequences, right? Because like a protein is not that long in terms of like how many amino acid characters you have. But what we did is like we kind of like concatenated multiple proteins from the same family. So kind of like that they have kind of like evolved together, like these are called homologs. And so that, and then you just model on that, on these like kind of like concatenated homologs. And this then gives you like a very strong evolutionary signal, and you can use this later to condition the model in like different protein spaces. So you have like a sample of, okay, we have 5 proteins we care about, and we want to generate similar ones like that. Then you can just condition on like those proteins that you already have. And so this gives the model a strong evolutionary signal, like about things that evolve together. And it also enables us then to generate novel proteins. And it also allows us to do fitness scoring. I will briefly mention this very briefly. And for this one, we use just MLSTM layers, so nice and parallelizable, because here we really try to push like long context abilities and wanted to test how good is this on long contexts. And we trained just 2 variants, so kind of smallish, 26 million, 100 million parameters, but the context lengths were very large. That's why also the models were not bigger, because we pushed them to like around 260,000 amino acid tokens. And here you can see the performance like on scaling. So this is like the small one, like 20 million model. This is the 100 million model. And here you can see the progress over training, like how many billion tokens it sees. And basically this is just the validation loss. And here you can see the context length. So we have 2 to the power of 11, so kind of standard. And basically the orange one is the prot Mamba. This is like a released model before. Then we have a prot transformer. This is the green one. And then we push this like to this like large context sizes, like either 130,000 tokens or 260,000 tokens for a small model. And the transformer here is of course like too expensive, at least for the implementation that we had to train. And we can see that the orange one is a Mamba. And if you have like input gating and additional stuff, like the xLSTM improves quite significantly over the Mamba. And for the larger model, so this line here is the performance of the released prot Mamba. So this is like a baseline model that was released prior to our work. And then we did like this context extension schedule. So over training, you always increase the context size, and this is where you see loss drops. So at each context increment, the model has more context to make predictions from. So that's why you expect, like, that's why you see these steps. The model just has more context, and that's why it's better at modeling like the current token. And what we can see here is also like a significant drop. So at the largest context window, we can see that the xLSTM is better than the Mamba. and the loss would still go down, or is still improving with the sequence length. So this means the model somehow can make use of the whole context and does not really forget, because it gets better if you give it more context. This is what it says here. Performance increases consistently with sequence length. And we find that the xLSTM in this setting outperforms both strong transformer and Mamba baselines. And how we use this at inference time then is, one use case is this homology-aware generation. So basically you condition on like some proteins that you care about, and you want to have similar proteins to that. And then you just use the parallel mode to kind of like encode this. You get like the MLSTM hidden states, and then you just decode from there and do the like iterative recurrent decoding. And this then generates novel protein sequences. And now we can check, okay, how similar are these protein sequences to properties of the family. And if you compare this to other architectures like Mambas and transformers, what we found is that the distribution of the proteins that were generated by xLSTM, they more closely match the real distributions of the proteins compared to the distributions that were produced by Mambas or transformers. So the xLSTM here was basically just a better protein model. Another cool thing is like fitness prediction. So because you learn about the tokens, like which amino acids have been conserved over like evolution, so which makes a protein fit. A protein can only survive in like this stable state. So there are like benchmarks around where people have tried basically to introduce mutations. So you have like a protein sequence, and you change like some amino acids, and then you measure in like a lab experiment, okay, how kind of fit is this protein still? And so you have like this wild type, and you introduce this mutation, and you have like fitness scores. And because the LSTM has kind of learned this evolutionary signal, you can then use it to score basically the mutation. So you have like some homolog context. These are like similar proteins to the wild type, the one that you're trying to score. So this is kind of like a retrieval augmentation. And then you mask out the position where you want to know the fitness. And then you correlate this to like real lab results. And so you can use kind of like a basically a in silico, or like in a computer evaluation of, okay, how fit would basically this protein be. And this is a lot used for protein design, or if you want to, I don't know, optimize some proteins. And if you look at this benchmark, so this is like a correlation score against real scores. And what we find is like we get competitive performance with the class of sequence-only models. So if you compare to transformers that have been trained on text only, and are like text in the sense of like protein sequence text, and Mambas that we're trained at, we are also in the same category, and we perform quite well. But if you then use models that also use like structure information and stuff like this, so not just text, but also like a 3D structure like AlphaFold does for the protein, then you improve the performance. And this is like one avenue where this thing could be improved, that we just add also structural information and things like this. Yeah, so next would be the time series. So this is the recent model that has been released called Tyrex. It basically does zero-shot forecasting with pre-trained models. So what is the problem in forecasting? Basically, you want to predict future time steps of a time series given just the historic context, so classical forecasting. And but here the twist is that you train kind of like a foundation or general model. You train it on a lot of time series that you find like from a lot of data sets, and then you can do zero-shot forecasting. So you give it the history, and because it has seen so many time series, it can out of the box make a like reasonable or good prediction how good your it can make a reasonable forecast, so to say. And the cool thing is you don't need machine learning to model the time series, or don't need to train anything. You take your time series, you throw it in, and see what comes out. And this is the Tyrex. So this is like a pretty small model. It's like 35 million parameters, and basically chops the input time series into non-overlapping windows, and then it encodes those using like these residual blocks, and you have them at like the input and at the output. And in the middle, you have like basically an xLSTM. So here, time series again is like recurrent modeling, where the LSTM was pretty strong before. Like here, the xLSTM is like a very strong thing to use, right? So basically, this is like the xLSTM using kind of like a transformer block style thing. And then in the end, you just do kind of like quantile regression. So this thing predicts like 10 quantiles at each output. And then you can get also kind of like a bit of uncertainty forecast. Yeah, so you have this is just the thing that you want to use, this state tracking. So you have state tracking and strong in context learning. It's because the transformer lacks this. And there are like some theoretical papers that looks at like complexity classes, like what these things can learn. And yeah, the state tracking with transformers is not so good there. And you have basically the old LSTM did not have this really like in context learning, and now you combine it against like same idea. Then the paper introduced like some tricks. You have like continuous patch masking, and basically here you just mask out in like contiguous manner basically the input sequence, and the model basically needs to learn first to reconstruct those, and then also to pass kind of like propagate this information over the cell state. And with this masking, you can also do multiple predictions into the future. So the model is kind of forced to learn to predict like multiple windows into the future. And this is also how it's kind of used at inference. So if you want to make like a forecast, what you do is you just basically mask out these future tokens, and the model then gives you like a reasonable forecast. Also some training augmentations. So you just stochastically augment samples during training. So basically you have like some amplitude modulation, or you inject like some spikes at like different intervals. This is just to make the data sets more diverse. And basically this is the benchmark results. So this is like a rank score here. So lower is better. And this is the gift eval. This was introduced like in this paper down here. And what we can see is the T-Rex is best compared to like Kronos is, for example, a large model by Amazon. And we can see basically the T-Rex achieves the best on long-term benchmark settings, also on short-term benchmark settings, like short-term forecasts. And it is much smaller than other state-of-the-art models. So Kronos, for example, is like very similar in spirit, also like similar in the chunking strategy, but it basically uses a transformer. But here really this like recurrent bias or recurrent mode of the xLSTM really seems to help a lot and improve the performance. So T-Rex is the best model on this like released large scale time series forecasting benchmark. Yeah, also there was like concurrent and work like this Toto. I don't know, maybe you have heard of it. I think it's from Datadog. And it also like outperformed that. But there's still a lot of room to improve. Yeah, and inference and speed again. So it's like smaller than a transformer. I think it's like 10 times smaller or something like this. And you can use these fast xLSTM CUDA kernels. This is the one that I talked about before, this like flash RNN paper. So this uses this and then gives us like it's considerably faster than the state of the art. So for example, you have times FM, which is a large model, and it's 11 times faster than this times FM, and it's also 4 times faster than the Kronos Bolt. So you get great performance for like much less cost. Yeah, and to sum up, I will just give a bit of an outlook of current research and conclude from there. So one thing that we are now working on is transformer to xLSTM distillation. So we have seen that basically pre-training is very expensive, right? So NXAI did a lot of pre-training for like a 7 billion model, but of course 7 billion models are not the largest ones today, and the pre-training is a lot of cost. So the thing is also, can we also use the models that have been already produced by other players and use maybe like different post-training processes to make this model better? And one thing is this transformer to xLSTM distillation. In the literature, they also refer to this as like linearization. And what linearization basically does is you usually have like some transformer, like think of like some llama or whatever, like a model that performs very well. And now you want to have like a cheap training process that basically just switches out the sequence mixers. So you just it basically initialize, you let all the weights initialized. But what you do is through some training process, you basically switch out the softmax attention for like a linear sequence mixer, like Mamba, xLSTM, gate linear attention. And we are extensively trying this with xLSTM, and we'll also release something pretty soon. Another thing is, okay, how do you do improved time series modeling? So because kind of like the Tyrex was a first step in this direction, but first, how can it be improved with more scale, like more scale in model parameters, but also in like more data, like different data. Also like doing like multivariate modeling. So now it is usually used as like it just models like one time series, but a lot of time series have like are like multivariate. And what they usually do is like they just use like the single variate models on these multivariates, but there are more interesting like fusion strategies that one can try. And this is also like one active area of research. And also just additional data modalities, because what usually it's doing is like it just conditions on like some forecast window, right? And then predicts like the next window. So it just sees the time series itself. But often for a time series, like a lot of different contexts could be useful. Like what actually are we modeling? The model here really does not know it. It just knows stuff like seasonality and patterns, but it doesn't know, okay, this is like energy forecasting or something that is like inherently seasonal or whatever. So the question is, okay, how do you provide like more like information like that? Another thing, of course, like everyone's talking about the reasoning models. So if you've seen O1 or O3 or DeepSeek R1, so now is like all the language models, they have started to use like RL to improve the models in the sense that the more training compute, the more compute you put in at test time, so you let the model think for longer and you train it, for example, on verifiable rewards using reinforcement learning, the performance improves. This is what you see here. Like you have the like kind of a scaling law, you have test time compute goes up and also the performance goes up. So this is after training. So the longer thinking traces a model generates, the better its performances can get. The problem here is with RL, you have to train it in online mode. And for online mode, you need to train a transformer with like standard sampling. This means you really need to use a transformer in recurrent mode with the like key value cache, which is a bit clumsy. And it makes it like also very, very expensive to train. Because now it cannot use the parallelizability that it has. It has to be trained step by step for these RL settings. And the question is, okay, how can we use like recurrence and xLSTM primitives and stuff like this? How can they be leveraged to improve the performance of reasoning models like this? Maybe there could be like hybrid modes, or how can this build into a model? Or do we need to distill a transformer first and then basically do RL with like a distilled transformer, so to say? So it's a bit of the question, how can we use these faster sampling then also for these reasoning models? Especially if the test time compute here like improves the performance. Now with like a recurrent thing, you can sample much faster. So this means for the same amount of compute, you get like even more basically, like for example, rollouts that you generate. This means you should get like, if you're cheaper, you get for the same compute also better scaling. So this should also improve this test time scaling loss. And finally, is just evolve xLSTM like further. So I think in recent months, there has been a lot of like very interesting architecture research. So for example, there was a cool work on sparse attention by DeepSeek. This is called NSA, or native sparse attention, which kind of combines like 3 different attention mechanisms, but that are also like very efficient. They still use a key value cache, but at least they select smartly from that cache. So they have like a sliding window that just looks at the last few things. They have like a selective attention mechanism that picks out interesting chunks from the past. And they do compressed attention, where you just kind of first compress the sequence and then do full attention over those compressed tokens. And then you combine it with like a single router. So this is, I think, like very interesting how to make attention more efficient. But and there have been also other cool works, like this is from Albert Gu, like this is the group that invented the Mamba. They now think a lot about like dynamic chunking, that the model kind of learns to tokenize by itself, because tokenizations is the only thing that's still not end-to-end in kind of like language modeling. And here they try to find ways to really dynamically learn this chunking. And also like how do you get more hierarchy into these networks? Like for example, in their network, it's called a HNet. Like this is this dynamic chunking here in this paper. Like they really propose to think more about like hierarchical structures within these language models, instead of having like one isotropic block that has like same input as same output, but to have also more like compressive stages and so on in there. So the question is, which architectural components are needed for efficient sequence modeling? Is it hierarchy? Is it dynamic computation, like in MOS or in like this chunking? Is it hybrid attention? So because it's not black and white that we just have to use like compressive xLSTM attention, but we can also combine it with like other attention mechanisms, like the sparse attention here used in NSA. And the question is, okay, what is needed to like really get a subquadratic strong model, and how to combine it with existing kind of like components. And with that, like I'm done with the tutorial. Thank you.
We have some time for questions. So questions, please.
Thanks for the talk. I have 2 questions. First one is for my understanding in that at the beginning you said compared to transformers where you had the softmax attention, but then what we're doing in linear attention is we get rid of the softmax on the Q and K, but we still need to do some like normalization, like say with the cell states, so that like after you're getting the outer product, so so that it doesn't lead to instability during training.
Not necessarily. So standard linear attention, like they usually get rid of this like normalizer state, so they remove that. And in like what has kind of like replaced that is usually like a norm layer after the linear attention. So you have like GLA, like this gated linear attention, or also in the new MLSTM implementation, you kind of like get rid of the normalizer state, but you have like a normalization layer after the attention, and this kind of like serves the same purpose and keeps everything nice and stable. But in the original MLSTM formulation, yeah, you had to use the normalizer state also because of this like exponential gating to make this like more stable. So yeah, with normalization, it's always a bit of like also like you need it for stability, or for some things like you really don't need it. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, makes sense. And my second question is, like from my like rough reading of like linear attention, I heard like when it comes to backpropagation, like the update rules are kind of very important. So I'm wondering, when you're training for like xLSTM, like do we follow the normal sort of like what kind of loss function that you would use, and do you follow the traditional sort of backpropagation training rules, or do you also building tricks for like updates?
No, so in this setting, you really like if you train like these like linear attention models, right? You really have like it's more like a feed forward thing, because you have a lot of these parallel things in there. So think of it like every chunk optimizes like end to end like a standard transformer. Like this is like this chunk-wise parallel thing, right? So you really have like a feed forward component at each chunk, so to say, and the recurrence only goes over this. So you don't really need any trainings like, and for losses, you just use standard language modeling losses. So it's really just standard what do you know from transformer training. Yeah. So no special tricks needed.
Time for one more question.
I have a question. So as far as my understanding, the main difference between Mamba and xLSTM is the gating mechanism. Both of them use linear attention.
Yes. So Mamba is very close to linear attention, same as MLSTM, right? And the MLSTM is also like equipped with this like input gate. So Mamba does only filtering of like the past state, and the MLSTM basically also filters like the incoming information. But a lot of these architectures really differ only in like how the gate is formulated first, and also like is it applied only to the past state, and is it applied to the input, right?
So the xLSTM gating mechanism or property is the main property that makes xLSTM outperforms Mamba.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
One very fast one, or we go for a pause?
Perhaps just a quick question. whether or not this has been extended to the application of audio, just out of curiosity. So whether xLSTM has been implemented for audio, and how that went.
At least no one from our institute did that so far, but I would assume it could work quite well, because with audio you have a bit the same problem, like what defines a token, right? And they often use like these like learned tokenizers, like encodec or whatever. And also like this was also like one of the main thing about this new architecture from Albert Gu, like this hierarchical thing here, that the SSMs and linear attention things, they tend to work well on like very raw information. Also in bio, like where you really have like nucleotides or amino acids, like really like character level inputs. The other transformers are not very good. And but if you have some kind of way that you can use like an SSM for tokenization, then I think for audio it could work very well. Something like this could be pretty interesting. And otherwise, I think also on like if you have like some like two-stage learn tokenizer, I think it could work quite competitively. At least we have seen across domains it worked a bit better or same. So I would not. I think I would be surprised if audio would be any different.
Thank you.
No.
I would like to close it if it's okay. Okay, so we make 5 minutes, 10 minutes pause, and then the next speaker will come. Sorry.
I think it's half an hour.
Half an hour?
Yeah.
Half an hour pause? Oh, we have the coffee pause too, right?
Yeah. And then it's at 11 side,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, exactly. And then you're back at 11. I think Niklas will stay here, so if you have specific question or stuff you want to discuss, if you want to implement the xLSTM yourself, just butter him. Yeah, and thank you again for coming. Yeah, let's do another applause and close it.
I would have wanted to tell you to stop sharing your screens, but it's done.